I hope you have already remembering the previous urology topics we have discussed. We initially had anatomy class followed by hematuria and trauma to urinary system. Now today we are going to have a very important topic in urology, that is urolithiasis. So why is it important? As you know, stone disease is a very common disease we see, and as MBBS students you should have a basic idea about how to deal with this stone disease, especially in the emergency department when they come to casualty with severe pain. What all things you should look for. With this introduction, we will start the topic urolithiasis. So what is urolithiasis? Urolithiasis is the condition where urinary stones are formed or located anywhere in the urinary system. So it can be either in the kidney. So you call it as a kidney stone, and in the kidney it can be either present in the calyces of the kidney. You might be remembering there are multiple calyces in the kidney which joins to form the renal pelvis. So when the stone is in the superior calyx of the kidney, you call it as a superior calyceal stone, or when it is in the middle calyx, you call it as a middle calyceal stone, or sometimes the stone might be in the inferior calyx, then you call it as a inferior calyceal stone. Sometimes the stone will be present in the renal pelvis, then you call it as a pelvic stone. Sometimes the stone is very large, it will be occupying the pelvis and extending to two or more calyceal system. These types of stones you call it as staghorn calculus. Then there can be stones located in the ureter. Majority of these stones are stones which are coming down from the kidney and getting obstructed in the ureter. Primary ureteric stones can occur, especially in conditions like ureterocele, or some condition which produces stagnation of urine in the ureter, like stricture of the ureter. But these are rare compared to stones coming from the kidney. More common ureteric stones are stones which are coming down from the kidney and getting obstructed in the ureter. Then there can be stones in the bladder. It can be called bladder stones, or even very rarely stones can get obstructed in the urethra. So coming to the epidemiology, it occurs in all parts of the world. It is a relatively common condition, and there is a lifetime risk of 2 to 5% for Asian origin, and compared to Western population we have incidence which is less than in Western countries. Then it is very common in persons who live in hot climate areas, especially desert areas, or those living in the mountain areas. They have more chance of stone formation. Then certain diets predispose to stone formation, especially foods which are rich in oxalate or calcium content or uric acid content. These can produce stones. Then there are some hereditary conditions like renal tubular acidosis type 2. You can have calcium phosphate stones, or conditions like hereditary alkaptonuria or hereditary hypercalciuria. There are conditions like that. This can also predispose to recurrent stone formation. Another important factor in the stone is the recurrence rate. You can see even once the patient had a stone incidence, the same patient, there's a high chance of recurrence of stone if you follow up for a particular period. See, even after 1 year there's a 10% chance of recurrence, and by 5 years there is about 35% of patients will have a recurrent stone formation. Even if you do surgery or medically you treat the stone and completely the stone passes out, even these patients, again, if you follow up for a period of 10 years, there will be about 50% of these persons again develop a stone episode. Then most common age group is in the middle age group, but we have seen patients even in Amala itself. I have done surgery for a 1.5-year-old female child. So stone age, it can occur in any age group, but more common it is in the middle age group. Then male to female ratio is 3:1, because as you know, most of the outdoor activities will be done by males, and less chance of less of fluid intake. So all these might be predisposing to male predisposition. Then coming to the stone composition, it can be either calcium containing or non-calcium containing stones. So majority of stones are calcium containing, and the most common type is calcium oxalate calculi. About 60% are formed by calcium oxalate. Then mixed calcium oxalate and calcium phosphate. Then bruchite stone, that is calcium hydrogen phosphate dihydrate, that is bruchite stone. These are again calcium containing stones. Then the next type is uric acid calculi. This is a non-calcium containing stone. And pure uric acid stones are radiolucent. You will not see uric acid stones in X-rays. Then next is struvite calculi. Struvite calculi is otherwise called infection calculi because it forms in patients with recurrent urinary tract infection, especially by gram-negative organisms. So struvite stone, another peculiarity is these stones become very large. Majority of staghorn shaped calculi are struvite calculi chemically. So what is the chemical composition? It is magnesium ammonium phosphate. Then coming to the next type, it is cystine calculi. This occurs in a condition called cystinuria. Then certain medications can also predispose to stones like indinavir. You might be knowing what indinavir is used for. It is a protease inhibitor used in HIV infection. Then triamterene. Triamterene is a potassium sparing diuretic used in hypertension. Then silica. All these can again predispose to stones. So calcium stones account for majority of stones. These are radio opaque. These can be majority of these calcium containing stones will be seen in the X-ray KUB. Then there are multiple factors and etiologies which predispose to calcium stones. We will come to that later. Then struvite calculi, magnesium ammonium phosphate stones. These account for 10% of stones. These are infection stone, gram-negative rods capable of splitting urea into ammonia, which combines with the phosphate and magnesium and form struvite stone. These are more common in females, and this occurs in alkaline urine. Usually the pH is greater than 7. And you might be remembering the normal urine pH is 5.5 to 6.5. These struvite stone majority are staghorn shaped, but all staghorn stones are not struvite. Okay, even cystine stones can become very large and produce a staghorn appearance. So staghorn stones are non-obstructive because they are slowly growing but involving the whole pelvic calyceal system, but these are majority are painless. The majority of these are discovered incidentally or while you do evaluation for a recurrent urinary tract infection. Then uric acid stones accounts for about 10% of calculi. This occurs in a acidic urine. Usually the pH will be less than 5.5. When there is high purine intake. High purine means even animal meat, or even in malignancy patients there is high protein catabolism. This can produce high uric acid. Then about 25% of these patients will have gout or arthritis due to hyperuricemia. Then pure uric acid stones, as I mentioned earlier, these are radiolucent. See, if you do look at the X-ray KUB, you will see a normal picture. But if you take a IVP or a intravenous pyelogram, that is you are injecting dye intravenously, which is excreted by the kidney, and when you take multiple films, you will see the pelvic calyceal system and the ureter. You can see a filling defect at the area of stone. So even uric acid stones, if you do an IVP, you may be able to pick up the stone by seeing a radiolucent defect. And if you take a CT KUB, CT scan, all these stones will be picked up by CT scan. So the best imaging, if somebody asks for a stone disease, it will be a plain CT KUB. You need not give contrast for seeing the stones. All stones can be picked up by plain CT KUB. And depending on the Hounsfield unit of the stones in CT scan, you will get an idea about the composition. Usually calcium containing stones, the Hounsfield unit will be around 1000, whereas uric acid stone, the Hounsfield unit will be around 400. So depending on the Hounsfield unit in CT scan, you will get a general idea about the composition of stone also. Coming to cystine stones, this accounts for about 2% of renal calculi. It occurs in a condition called cystinuria. This is an autosomal recessive condition, and there is defect in the reabsorption of dibasic amino acids like cysteine, ornithine, lysine, and arginine. This is a usual entrance question. In cystinuria, all amino acids are excreted in urine except, the question will be like that. So the code is COLA: cysteine, ornithine, lysine, and arginine. These 4 amino acids are excreted in urine in cystinuria, and this can predispose to formation of cystine stones. Then I mentioned earlier certain metabolic abnormalities can predispose to recurrent stone formation. So we will see which are these metabolic abnormality. The most common condition is hypercalciuria. That is increased amount of calcium is excreted in urine. The other condition is hyperoxaluria. More of oxalate is excreted. Then it can be hyperuricosuria, or sometimes there can be hypocitraturia or hypomagnesiuria. Sometimes the pH will be abnormal. Highly acidic urine can predispose to acidic stone formation, and abnormally high pH or alkaline urine can predispose to struvite calculi. Okay, then less of fluid intake is also another factor. That is, the urine output ideally should be about 2 liters per day. If the urine is very concentrated, it can predispose to stone formation. We will see that in all our urine, there will be excretion of all these things in urine, like calcium, oxalate, uric acid. All these are excreted normally in urine, and many of the situations the concentration is supersaturated. That is, it is more than what is required for stone formation. But why everybody is not having stone is there are certain chemicals in urine which prevents the formation of stones. These are the main factor is the citrate. Okay, so citrate is also excreted in urine, and this prevents stone formation. Even though the calcium or oxalate or uric acid level is high in urine, because of the presence of inhibitors like citrate or magnesium, we are not developing stones majority of the time. But when there is associated hypocitraturia and hypomagnesiuria associated with all these hypercalciuria, it can predispose to stones. So are we checking all these metabolic abnormality in all stone formers? No. There are specific indication, like if the patient is a first time stone former, you need not do all these urine evaluation to look for calcium, oxalate, uric acid, magnesium, citrate levels. But if it is a recurrent stone former, it's always better to do a metabolic workup by taking 2 24-hour urine sample. Okay, and how you are doing metabolic evaluation is you assess the urine volume, pH of the urine, and the amount of urinary calcium, oxalate, citrate, magnesium, and uric acid. At least 2 samples should be taken, then only the result will be relevant. Then why we are not doing every patient this metabolic analysis in all patients is it is a costly evaluation. Okay, each time patient will have to spend some 5,000 rupees. So only in recurrent stone formers or pediatric stone formers, or in high risk persons like pilots or those going in ships and all, they will not have enough medical facility if they develop a stone. So these persons also, it's better to go for a metabolic evaluation, identify the exact metabolic abnormality, and if possible treat it medically. So what are the radiological investigations we can do? The main first evaluation we do is a plain X-ray KUB. About 80% of urinary calculi can be detected by X-ray. But even the X-ray is normal in case of uric acid stones or certain medication stones, and even struvite calculi, they are only faintly radio opaque. So they can be also sometimes missed by X-ray KUB. So X-ray alone cannot rule out a stone disease. And after X-ray we can do a intravenous pyelography or IVP or IVU, intravenous pyelogram or urogram. I told you that is done by injecting some contrast material intravenously. This will be excreted rapidly by the kidney, and when you, after injecting the contrast material, when you take multiple serial x-rays, you will be able to clearly see the pelvic calyceal system. Then comes the ultrasound scan of abdomen, but ultrasound is not very sensitive for detecting ureteric calculi. Renal calculi can be very well detected by ultrasound, but ureteric calculi, it is not easy to trace the ureter by ultrasound imaging, especially obese patients or those with a bowel gas. These patients, ultrasound is a very poor imaging, you can say, for detecting ureteric calculi. So the best imaging is always a CT-KUB or plain CT scan of the abdomen. This can detect almost all calculi very specifically. See, this is an X-ray. First picture is an X-ray KUB. You can see a radio opaque shadow. But unless you do a contrast study, you will not be able to see where exactly in the kidney the stone is located. See, the next picture is an IVP film. You can correlate these two and see that the stone is located in the renal pelvis. See this picture, first picture there is a radio opaque shadow, and in the second picture, when you analyze both, you can see that calculi is in the inferior calyx. This is important for deciding the treatment, especially surgical treatment. See this film, first film, there is a radio opaque shadow. Second film, when you analyze, it is a renal pelvic calculi which is extending to the inferior calyx. This is called a staghorn shaped calculus. You can see it's a large calculus which is occupying the pelvis and extending to almost all the calyces. This film is a CT scan. You can see there's a white small shadow you can see. So that is how CT will detect the stone. So coming to the clinical features of stones, majority of small stones which are located inside the kidney are asymptomatic. So small non-obstructing stones in the kidney rarely produces symptoms, and even if they produce some symptoms, they are moderate and easily controlled. So what is the main symptom of stone disease? It is pain. And when pain happens, when these stones in the kidney, they are trying to pass through the urinary system, they will get obstructed in the ureter, because the diameter of ureter is about 5 millimeter. Any stone which is more than 5 millimeter can theoretically obstruct the ureter and produce severe pain. So the passage of stones into the ureter is associated with the classical renal colic. This is otherwise called ureteric colic. This is the situation where patients come to casualty. Because this is one of the most excruciating painful situation. So the classical renal colic, there will be acute onset of severe pain radiating to the groin. And if you, in these patients, if you do a urine routine investigation, you can see majority of these patients will have presence of RBCs in urine, because when the stones are moving in the urinary system, that produces minor mucosal trauma. So that will produce some RBC. It may not be visible to our eye, but if you do a urine routine evaluation, in majority of cases there will be microscopic hematuria. Gross hematuria is rare in stone disease but can sometimes be seen. Then there can be associated nausea and vomiting along with severe pain. So depending on the position of stones in the ureter, whether it is the upper ureter, mid ureter or lower ureter, the pain radiation can also vary. When it is in the upper ureter, pain tends to radiate to the flank and lumbar areas, whereas when it is in the mid ureter, the pain usually radiates anteriorly and caudally, and when it is in the right side, you will have confusion whether it is an appendicitis or a ureteric calculi, and when it is in the left side, you can sometimes confuse with diverticulitis. When the stone is in the distal ureter and vesico-ureteric junction, the pain usually radiates to the groin or testicles or even labia majora in a female. and it can also produce some irritative urinary symptoms like urinary frequency and dysuria. And remember, the narrowest portion of ureter is the vesico-ureteric junction, and this is the area where majority of ureteric calculi gets obstructed. So do all these patients coming to a hospital requires admission? No. So what are the indications where you have to admit the patient when they present with stone disease? One is oral analgesics are insufficient to manage the pain. Sometimes the pain will be so severe initially, so they requires intravenous or intramuscular analgesics. So in these situations it is better to admit the patient. Sometimes the vomiting will be intractable. Patient may require IV fluid supplementation. In these cases also it's better to admit. Then when you call it as an emergency, sometimes the patient will have bilateral ureteric obstruction simultaneously. So both kidneys are obstructed means patient can go in for renal failure. So this is one condition where patient needs emergency intervention. Or even in a solitary kidney, sometimes one kidney might be removed already for some malignancy, or one kidney may not be functioning, only one kidney will be functioning. So solitary functioning kidney with obstruction or a bilateral ureteric obstruction producing renal failure is an indication for emergency intervention. Then ureteric obstruction with a stone with associated renal infection. In these cases also you need to relieve the obstruction. Why? Because even though you are giving antibiotics, there is stagnation of the infected urine and pus in the kidney because of the stone obstruction. So these cases you need, unless you relieve the obstruction, patient is not going to improve. So medical management alone should not be done in the presence of a ureteric stone with renal infection. Ultimately, if there is only one side obstruction and patient can be managed with oral analgesics, you can send the patient without admission. And ultimately, some of these stones will pass spontaneously, whereas some stones will not pass. That depends on the position of stones in the obstructing the ureter. If it is the upper ureter, the chance of spontaneous passage is less compared to stones which are already reached the vesico-ureteric junction. Again, the size of the stone. Larger stones, chance of spontaneous passage is less, especially more than 6 to 7 millimeter. Okay, so about 15 to 20% of these patients ultimately requires invasive intervention. This is depending on the stone size and continued obstruction in spite of medical management, presence of infection, or sometimes due to recurrent episodes of ureteric colic. So how you are going to treat the stone disease? I will tell you some treatment options and how to do medical management. Usually less than 5 millimeter stones, at least theoretically, can pass unobstructed from the kidney through ureter into bladder and urethra and outside. So less than 5 millimeter stone in the kidney which is not producing much symptoms, you can manage conservatively. So what is the conservative management? Mainly it is to increase the fluid intake. Drink at least 3 to 4 liters of water per day, so that urine output should be minimum of 2 liters. And 70 to 80% of stones can be treated conservatively, especially small stones. So what are the dietary modifications you should do? I told you majority of stones are calcium oxalate, or 10% are uric acid. So restrict foods which are rich in oxalate, calcium and uric acid. So which are the foods rich in oxalate? Spinach, dark chocolate or cocoa, then black tea, cashew nuts, sweet potato, even tomato. Then animal foods, they are rich in uric acid. Then reduce salt intake. Then which are the fluids which are recommended? Increase the fluid intake. At least 2 to 3 liter of water should be taken regularly daily. And calcium should not be restricted much, especially in a pediatric patient, because calcium is needed for bone growth, and also adequate calcium intake should be recommended. Don't over restrict calcium. Then what is the other role for medical therapy? Medicines help in expulsion of small stones in the ureter. This is called medical expulsion therapy, and also in preventing recurrent formation of stones in the kidney. So what is medical expulsion therapy? I told you sometimes stones will get obstructed in the ureter. Not all patients require surgical treatment. If pain can be managed by oral medication, you discharge the patient with medical expulsion therapy, and the main drug in medical expulsion therapy is alpha 1 blockers. What do alpha 1 blockers do? This will relax the lower ureteric, especially vesico-ureteric junction area. There are ureteric smooth muscles that will be relaxed by alpha blockers. So this will help in the spontaneous passage of stones. Then usually we give thiazide diuretics also, that will produce a diuretic effect and helps in stone passage, and also that will reduce the urinary calcium level. Then for the recurrent stone formals, if it is a calcium stone, you can give long-term thiazide diuretics. Usually we give hydrochlorothiazide 12.5 milligram or 25 milligram daily. Then potassium magnesium citrate is available. Citrate is the main inhibitor of stones in the urine. So you are giving citrate, especially with the added magnesium also. Then if it is a uric acid stone, main thing is reduce the animal proteins in the diet, reduce the intake of egg and meat. Then give potassium citrate to alkalinize the urine. Or even in case of hyperuricemia, you can give allopurinol or febuxostat. Then cystine stones, again you can alkalinize the urine with the bicarbonate or potassium magnesium citrate. Potassium magnesium citrate is available in tablet form and syrup form. Then struvite stone, I told you, it is otherwise called infection stone. This occurs in patients with recurrent urinary tract infection. Especially the most common organism producing struvite stone is Proteus. So long-term antibiotic to prevent infection is the main treatment option in a struvite stone. And how you identify these stones? Sometimes patient may pass the stone through urine, and you can do stone analysis in a lab. Then you will be able to identify the exact composition. Or even after surgery, when we remove the stone, we send the stone for a stone analysis. So what are the surgical options for stone disease? Two things are there. One is a patient presenting with a acute obstruction producing either renal failure or infection. That is an emergency situation. In this situation, sometimes you may not be doing definitive treatment for stone. Instead, you will be trying to relieve the obstruction manifestations, and if there is infection, that infection has to be relieved, and later on you do a elective surgery for stone. So how can you relieve the obstruction? You can put a ureteric stent. It is called JJ or double J stent, DJ or JJ stent. And other, if the stone is producing severe obstruction and you cannot pass a stent through the side of the stone, another option is you can do a percutaneous nephrostomy. That is, you are inserting a tube through the flank area into the kidney so as to relieve the obstruction. So ureteric stenting or a PCN insertion or percutaneous nephrostomy insertion is the emergency treatment for a patient presenting with a bilateral ureteric obstruction and renal failure, or a patient presenting with a ureteric obstruction and severe infection. Then what are the definitive surgical treatment? You have procedures like ESWL. It's called extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy, or ureteroscopic stone fragmentation, or PCNL. The full form is percutaneous nephrolithotomy. Or you have options like pylolithotomy. That is, you are opening the renal pelvis and removing the pelviceal calculi, or ureterolithotomy, that is removing the stone from the ureter, or cystolithotomy, that means removing the stone from the bladder. Then this can be done by either open method, laparoscopic, or even advanced robotic surgery. Then open anatrophic nephrolithotomy. This was the treatment option which was done routinely for a staghorn calculus previously. Anatrophic means it's an open surgery, and what you do is you are opening the kidney at the watershed area between the posterior segmental circulation and the anterior segmental circulation. That is, after mobilizing the kidney, you make an incision in the kidney, in the posterior aspect of kidney, in the medial 2/3 and lateral 1/3 junction, because posterior 2/3 of the kidney is supplied by posterior segmental artery, and whole anterior surface and lateral 1/3 of the posterior aspect of kidney is supplied by anterior segmental artery. So at the area between the anterior and posterior segmental circulation, if you open the kidney, you will minimum destroy the nephrons, or minimum vascularity to the kidney will be affected. I told you all these arteries to the kidney are end arteries. Each small segment is supplying a particular nephrons. So even if some small arteries will be injured during opening of the kidney, those nephrons will become ischemic. So to prevent maximum function of the kidney, you are doing this surgery. That is, you are opening the kidney at this particular portion and remove the staghorn calculus. But nowadays the treatment has changed. Even a staghorn calculus, majority advise multiple sitting PCNL with in between ESWL for small residual fragments. So coming to ESWL, this can be done under even local anesthesia. So what is ESWL? This is a minimally invasive method of treating stone disease. What the basic thing you should understand is there is a machine which produces shock waves. Okay, and these shock waves will be given over a wide area of the flank area, and these shock waves will be focused exactly at the stone. So we give usually about 3000 shock waves in one sitting, and this will produce stone fragmentation. So a large stone is made into multiple fragments, and these fragments has to pass through the ureter, and patient has to clear the stone through the normal urinary tract. So if there is some obstruction, or if the fragment is large, this can sometimes produce ureteric colic and severe pain while these fragments pass. So ESWL is a method by which stones are fragmented by the machine by creating multiple shock waves, and these stones will pass spontaneously through the urine. So as you know, success rate is not that much. If the stone is small, success rate will be more. Like more than 2 centimeter stone, usually the success rate is very less. So ESWL is advised only when the stone size is less than 2 centimeter. So the basic thing is shock wave focusing, and relatively weak non-intrusive waves are generated externally, and this creates sufficient strength only at the stone or the target where they generate enough force to fragment a stone. So this is done under fluoroscopic guidance, or repeated X-rays we take to see whether the focusing is correct. So in pregnancy, since X-ray is contraindicated, in pregnant patients you cannot give ESWL. And then coagulation disorders, even ESWL can sometimes produce severe hematuria. Then if the patient is obese, the success rate will be less. Then there are certain conditions like kyphoscoliosis. Positioning of patient will be difficult. And if there is some obstruction lower down in the ureter or urethra, even if you fragment the stone, these fragments will come and obstruct the urethra and produces pain, and patient will require a surgical intervention later. So these conditions better don't give ESWL. Then Coming to the next surgical option, PCNL. This is a minimally invasive surgical technique by which you remove renal stone, and this is the best option nowadays for removing renal calculi, because even large stones can be removed by PCNL, and even failed ESWL cases the option is PCNL. You don't have to study about the steps or PCNL. Just for your understanding, I am mentioning these points. How to do PCNL. Initially a catheter will be placed through ureter into the kidney, and you can inject some contrast material through that catheter so that you will be able to see a clear picture radiologically like this. Then after seeing the pelvic calyceal system radiologically, after injecting contrast, you puncture the particular calyx with a needle and you dilate the puncture area, and afterwards you can pass some instruments like a nephroscope, fragment the stone and remove them completely. See, these are the instrument sets usually we require. On the right extreme you can see that is the nephroscope. That is the instrument which we use to see the pelvic calyceal system, and you can see some needles and dilating instruments. Usually this is done with the patient in prone position, because I told you posteriorly the main attachment to kidney is muscular relations, whereas if you do supine, there is more chance of injuring intra-abdominal organs. See, the pelvic calyceal system is opacified. One needle is passing and entering into the calyx. Afterwards you dilate the tract and post-operatively there will be only a small incision. Coming to the next option, it is called ureteroscopic stone removal. So ureteroscopic manipulation of a stone is commonly applied method of stone removal, especially when the stone is in the ureter. See this picture, it can be either rigid ureteroscope or a flexible ureteroscope. Even flexible ureteroscope you can use to remove small stones in the kidney, because this instrument tip can be flexed, so you can remove calyceal stones also, whereas a rigid instrument you can use only to remove the ureteric calculi. Again, after visualizing the stone endoscopically, you have various methods to fragment the stone. Usual energy sources which you use are either laser energy. Laser can fragment all types of stones into very small fragments, or another option is a pneumatic lithotripscar. Pneumatic means compressed air is producing a jackhammer like effect and fragment the stone. See, this is the endoscopic view of a ureteric stone. Coming to the last portion, bladder calculi. Bladder calculi can be classified as either migrant calculi, primary idiopathic calculi, or secondary calculi, which include calculi related to urinary stasis, infection and foreign body. So what is primary idiopathic or endemic calculi? This occurs in usually children, and this results from dietary and nutritional deficiencies. These are composed of ammonium acid urate alone or in combination with calcium oxalate. Majority of bladder calculi are secondary calculi. Secondary means there can be urinary stasis or recurrent urinary tract infection due to bladder outlet obstruction or neurogenic bladder dysfunction. In male patients, especially elderly males, majority of these patients, the primary pathology is a BPH or prostate enlargement producing urinary stasis. Neurogenic bladder means some problem with the parasympathetic nerve supply of bladder. So these hypoactonic bladders cannot empty properly, can predispose to stone formation. See this picture, there's a large bladder calculi. So how you treat bladder calculi? If it is a small stone, you can pass a endoscope, cystoscope, and you can fragment the stone and remove. So transurethral cystolithotripsy is the procedure by which you remove small stones in the bladder endoscopically. Or just like PCNL, you can pass the same instruments and do a percutaneous cystolithotripsy. The advantage is the incision will be a small incision. Or if the stone is large, more than 3 centimeter, you can go for an open surgery that is called cystolithotomy. See the various pictures. First picture, you can see there's a large bladder stone. There's a layered stone. So that's a secondary stone. Then down you can see that procedure is called percutaneous cystolithotripsy. Just like PCNL for renal calculi, you can remove stones through a small incision. So to conclude, this urolithiasis is a highly prevalent condition. The most common type of stones are calcium containing stones. Various metabolic abnormalities like hypercalciuria is the most common. Okay, hypercalciuria, then hyperoxaluria, then hypositraturia and hypomagnesiuria are responsible for formation of calcium oxalate stones. The most common symptom is renal colic, and a comprehensive metabolic evaluation is recommended for patients who are at high risk of getting stone recurrence, and even stone recurrence can be prevented by medical therapy, the main drugs being potassium magnesium citrate and thiazide diuretics.